Here's something nobody is saying out loud. While missiles are falling on Iran, while oil tankers are sitting idle in the Strait of Hormuz, while world leaders are canceling plans, rerouting flights, and rationing fuel, one country woke up every single morning of this war and said, "We prepared for this. Not luck, not coincidence. A decade of quiet, deliberate, almost obsessive preparation." And now, as the rest of the world scrambles, that country is sitting at the center of every negotiation, every phone call, every emergency visit from heads of state. And it hasn't fired a single shot. That country is China. And the story of how it got here, what it actually wants, and what it's quietly doing behind closed doors, that is the story that matters right now. Let's start with the simple numbers, because the numbers are where this gets uncomfortable. China imports roughly 33% of its oil from the Middle East. 90% of Iran's crude oil exports go directly to China. Add to that about 30% of China's liquid natural gas supply, also from this region. All of it, historically, shipped through one narrow choke point, the Strait of Hormuz. Now the strait is blocked. There's both an Iranian blockade and a US naval blockade. Two powers, one waterway, zero traffic. By any normal logic, China should be in crisis, but it isn't. And the reason why tells you everything about how power actually works in the 21st century, and how countries that read history correctly end up sitting at the table while everyone else is begging for a seat. 10 years ago, China looked at its situation and did not like what it saw. It was dependent on foreign oil, on foreign shipping lanes, on a global order it did not control. So it started quietly de-risking. That is the word analysts use. De-risking. Building alternatives before the crisis, not during it. Today, China generates 2.5 terawatts of energy from solar and wind alone. It holds an estimated 1.3 billion barrels of oil in strategic reserves. Enough for 3 to 6 months of buffer if imports stopped completely tomorrow. It sits on 28 billion barrels of domestic oil in its northern fields, and it diversified its import sources: Australia, Russia, Central Asia, parts of Africa, and South America. Last year, it quietly opened a 3,150-kilometer direct freight railway to Iran, running through Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, all the way to Tehran. A land route, no ocean, no strait, no blockade. 84% of China's energy now comes from sources it either produces itself or controls through land corridors. Think about that number. 84%. While the rest of the world built economies on the assumption that the seas would always be safe and the oil would always flow, China was building a backup system for the day they wouldn't be. That day is now. Now here is where it gets complicated and a little ironic. China was buying Iranian oil at a steep discount. Why? Because Iran, under sanctions, had almost no other buyer. China stepped in and became Iran's economic lifeline, purchasing between 1 million and 1.5 million barrels per day at prices other nations couldn't access. A quiet, mutually convenient arrangement that lasted years. That relationship made China Iran's most important ally. Not by ideology, by necessity. And yet, watch what China is doing right now. It vetoed a UN Security Council resolution to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Not because it wants the strait closed, but because the resolution didn't address what China called the root causes of the conflict. And it blamed Iran in a way Beijing found one-sided. At the same time, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi got on the phone with his Iranian counterpart and told him directly that Iran's own blockade is also unacceptable. China is simultaneously defending Iran at the UN while telling Iran to stand down. That is not contradiction, that is leverage. Carefully, precisely applied. The question is whether it is enough. Here is the part the optimistic headlines are missing. Yes, China is better prepared than anyone. Yes, its economy grew 5% in the first quarter of 2026. Yes, fixed asset investment is up. Yes, it has buffers most nations can only dream about. But buffers have limits. Factory gate prices in China rose for the first time in 48 months this month. Inflation is starting to move into margins that were already razor thin. China manufactures 30% of the world's goods. If petroleum-based products become scarce, fertilizers, plastics, industrial inputs, the manufacturing chain that supplies the entire planet starts to grind. In Thailand right now, taxi drivers can only fill their tanks in the morning. Hotels are down 30% in tourist bookings because Europeans can't fly through the Middle East anymore. The US dollar has dropped sharply against the Chinese yuan, from 7.3 to 6.8 in recent months, a signal that investors are nervous about American stability, not just Middle Eastern conflict. And China sells to the world. If Thailand is struggling, if European demand collapses, if a global recession sets in, China's export machine slows regardless of how much oil it has stockpiled. The 1973 oil crisis lasted 5 months. It took the world nearly a decade to fully recover. We are now 5 or 6 weeks into this conflict. The buffers are real, but they are not infinite. Now zoom out, because the economic story, as big as it is only half of what is happening. Look at who has been flying to Beijing during this war: the Spanish Prime Minister, the Vietnamese President, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, the Prime Ministers of Canada and the United Kingdom, the German Chancellor, Russian officials affirming cooperation, the entire diplomatic world making a quiet pilgrimage to one city. Why? Because Washington is not functioning as the stabilizing anchor it once was. The US President picked a fight with the Italian Prime Minister for defending the Pope. He announced tariffs on China hours before a scheduled summit. He reportedly believed this war would be over in a couple of days. It was not. And into that vacuum, China is presenting itself as something remarkable: the calm, stable adult power, not replacing America, not yet, but offering something America currently cannot: predictability. For Gulf states, for European nations, for Southeast Asian economies desperate for someone to help de-escalate, China's position is simple. We have influence over Iran that no one else has. We want the strait open, and we are willing to talk. That is an extraordinary amount of diplomatic leverage for a country that has not committed a single soldier to this conflict. But here's the question none of the analysts can fully answer. China is not a puppet master. Iran is a sovereign nation in an existential fight. And as long as Israel continues operations in the region, as long as Tehran believes it faces an existential threat, no amount of Chinese pressure may be enough to bring the blockade down. China can push, it can persuade, it can threaten to reduce oil purchases, it can use Pakistan, a country with strong ties to both Beijing and Washington, as a back channel, but it cannot force a ceasefire, and it cannot control what Netanyahu decides to do tomorrow morning. There's a summit scheduled between Presidents Xi and Trump, possibly in May. It has already been delayed once. The entire world is watching to see whether two men in a room can find the language to pull the global economy back from the edge, or whether the moment has already passed. Allah does not change the condition of a people until they change what is within themselves. That is a reminder from the Quran that every civilization, every empire, every superpower eventually confronts. China prepared. The world did not. The question is not whether China wins this moment. The question is whether anyone actually wins, or whether we are all, at different speeds, heading toward the same reckoning.